All right, so here is the review for the third exam. So, our framework, right, which is basically the whole course. So for exam number 1, we did the 5 C's and STP. Exam number 2, we did product, branding, promotion. And exam number 4 is place, pricing. It's not here, but in international, and we can see it here more clearly, right? So we had our exam, which was mainly digital and regular promotions. And here really is where is exam 3. So exam 3, so let's see, let's put here something so that it becomes very clear. Right, exam 3 is here. So exam 3, um, is basically from here on, right? So basically is place, pricing, international. There may be something on ethics. We haven't talked about ethics yet. And then the case studies, well, Walmart, China, Uber, the Playing to Win, video, and Abercrombie. So let's jump to section 3. And just to make it very clear, I may even put a slide that says section 3. Oh, here it is. I already did. All right. Part 3, section 3. So again, I already put, you see, I wasn't sure if I did this for this course or not. Okay, so what is place? Place are distribution channel, coverage, locations, and even supply chain stuff like inventory, transportation, and logistics. So let's jump right to that. So supply chain, you have something called the upstream management. So this is all the inbound stuff. So if this is a manufacturing, right, then we have basically raw materials that are arriving, all the inbound logistics, because you may have inputs and raw materials from many different places, the warehousing. Then you produce the final goods, and then you have the downstream. Downstream is the finished product, outbound logistics, and most importantly, yes, marketing and sales, and even after sales, customer service, returns. So all that is part of supply chain. So then we have many different structures. And basically, the structures are you have the producer, and it can work directly with the retailer. Actually, it could go directly to the consumer if it's selling online directly to the consumer through retailers. So in this, let's use this example. P&G would go directly to retailers, to big retailers such as Walmart, Kroger, Safeway, Publix, right? But they're not going to go directly to a small independent like Mylands or Fresh Market. That they would go through some sort of wholesaler. And convenience stores, they would go through even a broker. Okay, we'll talk about broker in a second. P&G does sell online, but when they sell online, I believe they're selling through Amazon. So Amazon would be considered an intermediary as well. So we talked about some of these different intermediaries. So Cisco, the biggest wholesaler and distributor for food. And then you can see that if manufacturers try to go to every single customer, it would just be a nightmare, right? Can you imagine a truck of P&G products to a gas station? I mean, that makes no sense because there is not enough product to sell there. So this makes absolutely no sense. But if you go through a distributor, then you have less touch points. So here we have number of contacts without a distributor and with a distributor. And that's better for everybody. So we talked about restaurant depot, so that's a wholesaler for restaurants. So what do these wholesalers do? Okay. Well, wholesalers can help with the product, service, and assortment, uh, promotions, distribution. So basically, remember, wholesalers are working directly with retailers. And so, for example, in the case of gas station convenience stores, the wholesalers would be a good way for me to be able to buy small quantities. And when it comes to distributors, those that are also distributors, they had a lot of information of how much product and which products I should carry. So Granger is another big wholesaler. So basically, you have producer, wholesaler, retailer, and consumer. And this is the conventional way. But then there is also something called a vertical management system. And they all work together. The producer, wholesaler, and retailer work together, okay, before going to the consumer. This is a little bit more unusual. This is the way that it usually works. Okay, so some retailers are cooperatives and belong to these associations. So, for example, I was talking about Mylands. They are part of these co-ops and they use more similar to this type of association. We also talked about Costa. Costa is the biggest broker, and their big thing is they help those small manufacturers, so small, say, entrepreneurs who want to have distribution, these big retailers, and they have to go through distributors. Distributors will do everything that small companies sometimes cannot afford to do. Starting with, like, Walmart would not allow a small manufacturer without a broker. They wouldn't even see them because they're too small. So brokers represent many of these manufacturers, and they will do all the merchandising and the assortment and even provide all the data and so on. And they have those merchandisers that put the product on the shelf. So that's basically the main advantage. Now, there is a disadvantage, and you have to pay them. But again, if there wasn't, if the payment structure did not work, then there wouldn't be any small brands in places like Walmart. So they are very much aware of the margins, and they work with the manufacturers to make sure that that happens. So let's talk a little bit about how retailers work. So we talked about wholesalers. So retailers, they do care about assortment, pricing, promotions, distribution. More specifically, this is kind of the equivalent of their marketing mix: merchandising, promotion, store atmospherics, location, customer service, and a target market. So let's talk about each of these separately. So starting with merchandising. So we have something called Spaceman, Space Management. It's a Nielsen product, which allows retailers to do their planogram. Planogram is how much product and what shelf space should be allocated to each of the products on the shelf. Also, thing that I forgot to talk about is new products have to pay something called a slotting fee. A slotting fee is something you have to pay in order to get space on the shelf, because, if you have to put a new product, you have to remove an existing product. Then you have location distribution. Now, there's many different types of categories, and you have what are so-called destination categories. Destination categories are those categories that usually people go to the store for. So you run out of cereal. They're usually the big ones, right? So you run out of cereal or beer, or if you have small baby, diapers, baby food. So these are big, important categories of why people go to the store. So let's say, you're going in and you want to buy beer, right? Because it's Sunday and football and all that. So you go in, and what do? They make you go through all of these things. And then you're, oh, wait a minute, I need toothpaste, I need Tums, I need shampoo. And oh, wow, school and office supplies and all this stuff, which are higher margin. And then because more than 2/3 of the decisions are made in the store, and people 80% or so deviate from the shopping list, you bought your beer and you have a full shopping cart when you get out, right? So we have something called loss leaders. Loss leaders is they want to bring you in with one of these big categories So once you're in, you buy all these other things. So let's say you see an ad or a sign outside says, Target has the 24, 32 pack of water for like $2.99, some ridiculous price, where they don't care if they're losing money. Because when you go in, then you're going to buy other things. And we see this all the time, right? So like the roasted chicken in Publix or in Costco, so they don't care if they lose money because you're gonna buy other things. Merchandising are these displays. These are done by merchandisers. So we're talking about Costa. Costa has a whole series of people merchandise. So this particular thing. So you have Bud Light here. This is part of the push strategy. You have a big incentive, a big offer. So you build a display. This could be of a new product or existing product, something impactful. Or maybe there is no shelf space at all and you have something temporary, just promotional nature. So it looks like some movie. I can't tell which movie it is. So some movie, Paw, the movie. So they built this special display, put it in a space. And when you go into Walmart, then you have this standout. And then retailers have their own promotions, right? So they have coupons, they have their own promotions. So here is grooming, so it's like PetSmart. And again, I usually talk mostly about supermarkets and mass retailers, but then you have other types of retailers like clothing, where the store atmospheric basically is very much the image of the product and the brand. And last but not least, customer service. Customer service, big part of the strategy, because this is, like we talked about, where it makes a difference if you're going to return and be a loyal customer of this retailer or not. So this video is about Walmart, how it got started, and how they went to this structure where instead of having a salesperson and a buyer, there is a whole customer team. So like I told you, there is hundreds of employees and thousands of other companies, employees at Bentonville. And they're all serving Walmart, and they work in many different areas: logistics, accounting, sales, marketing, promotions. And then we talked about, what was I say, Steve Jobs? I meant Jeff Bezos, right? So his success, or the success of Amazon, he attributes to being fully customer centric. So most retailers were basically serving the needs of the vendors, especially in his case, where Amazon started selling books, only books. So Barnes and Noble and those retailers that sold a lot of books were used to basically doing whatever the publisher wanted in terms of promotion and all that. So he came out, for example, with this idea that he had I think eBay was doing it before, but anyway, eBay is basically used stuff where you can see ratings, you can see comments, and so on. So this marketplaces like Amazon work based on recommendation systems. And then we have this thing called omnichannel. Omnichannel is where multi-channel and omnichannel. Multi-channel is using many different retailing options. So you can use, you have basically brick and mortar and online. Omnichannel is integrating everything, right? Everything so that it follows the same campaign, the same theme, and it works in a way where one part helps the other. So in the case of Best Buy, we talked about the whole phenomenon of showrooming. But if there is an incentive for people to buy in the store and the price is essentially the same, or there is an extra incentive, then that combination works really well. So different types of retailers. We have big chains, right? Target, Kroger. Voluntary chains. I don't like this name, but because usually these are independents. They're called independents. So this is what I was talking about, like cooperatives, okay? And sorry, you have well, these are independent groups, and then you have cooperatives. So independents can be grouped in different ways. Some are uh, sponsor groups. So that's why I was telling you about the wholesaler, retailer working together. So this would be like IGA. IGA is very well known. I think you probably know True Value. So True Value, huge wholesaler. By the way, the reason they do this is so that they are kind of like sponsored but not owned by the wholesalers, but they're almost as if they were part of the same thing. And then you have they're very similar. It's just that here they work almost as if they're own, and here they're working very independently. But they join as a co-op, so you have the associated groceries, okay, so that they can compete with a big retailer. So then they will buy in bulk from like P&G and be able to compete with huge retailers like Walmart. And then you have franchises. We talked a lot about franchises. These are usually entrepreneurs that buy from a franchisor, in like McDonald's, Subway's most famous one. Even more than McDonald's, because McDonald's has, even though McDonald's kind of invented the franchise model, McDonald's has some corporate owned, but Subway, they're all pretty much uh, independent entrepreneurs. Okay, so now let's talk about price. So price, when we think about the customer and we think about the four P's, product promotion plays are the P's that are known for creating value. Okay, price is how you capture value. So this is in terms of the business. The business creates value for the consumer by developing products, branding, promoting it, and place. And they capture value. In other words, they get in return money from the consumer to obviously make sales and sorry and profits, sales and profit. So we have these things. So this is a very important table. Okay, so let's go through it slowly because there is a lot of information here in very few things. So we have something called the cost of goods sold. This is how much it costs to make your product or what you buy it for. And this is typically variable. So in terms of price, this would kind of be the floor. You don't want to go lower than this because then there is no incentive to sell. You make no money. Then your price, let's say you set it here, so this is good because there is an incentive to sell. So this is called the feasible zone. The feasible zone is you want it to be higher than the cost and lower than the perceived value. So this is kind of your ceiling. So the perceived value is how much the consumer is willing to pay, right? So if your price is higher than the perceived value, they will probably not buy it. And I say probably because the only reason they buy it is they have to. And that comes back to supply and demand. So when, there was the $10 toilet paper, well, obviously the perceived value for all toilet paper was not $10, right? But because there was no supply and demand, then that could happen. So there are exceptions, but typically the price, if it's not lower or the same as the perceived value, there is no incentive for the consumer to buy. So what is marketing? And more specifically, the three P's is to increase the perceived value, right? True economic value, again, has to do with the addition, the total profitability of this over time. But I don't want you to get confused. Perceived value, okay, and price. This is the part, and perceived value is what people are willing to pay. So price has the regular list price, discounts, allowances, payment period, credit terms. Okay, so some of these things, discounts are also considered part of trade promotion. We'll talk about that. But the terms, the payment period, if you have a credit card, that's considered part of your prices, right? So when you're going to buy a car, you take all those things into account. So we talked about supply and demand. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining this again. I'm going to go in detail in the example. So the price is this point of equilibrium. This is when supply and demand, when there is enough supply to meet the demand. And we saw that clearly with the Uber example. So let's go through these graphs. This is the famous supply and demand curve. And so let's use the Uber example for this, especially the demand side. So on one, we have here on the horizontal axis quantity and on the vertical price. Remember, what we are most interested about is this point of intersection. Okay? So let's say, you know, to take an Uber from your house, so you say you live on campus, to UM, normally costs $10, right? So based on the supply of drivers and the demand during regular hours, let's say on a Saturday, it's $10. Now what happens is you are taking this Uber at 8:30 in the morning. So at 8:30 in the morning, there is more demand. So now that the quantity of demand went up, then your price, which was originally $10, now look what happens. You move the demand and the point of intersection now is here. So let's say now it went from $10 to $12 or $15, whatever. It goes up. So with demand, it's quite easy. The higher the demand, the higher the price. So let's say you're here, $12, right? So this is D1, this is the original one. But then you need to take a Uber at 11 a.m. And at 11 a.m., the demand now goes to the left, so it goes down. And now here we have the point of intersection goes from here to here, because we just went from here, right, to here. And what happens to the price? It goes down. So now instead of being $12, it goes back to 10. Very easy to understand. Now I can use the Uber example for the supply curve, but I'm going to use an example that is easier for everybody to understand because we all went through it. And I'm going to start with this one. So here the supply moves instead of the demand. The demand remains constant and the supply goes down. So during the pandemic, we had huge supply shocks, right? All of a sudden, all production stopped. So what happens is now that the supply goes down, then the price goes up. So you see, we went from here to here. So supply curves basically go in the opposite direction. If the supply goes down, then the price goes up. And we had the extreme situation where toilet paper went up to like $10 or more. Now, let's say the supply goes back to normal. So this is post-pandemic. So now it goes back to normal. So here we had the higher price, but now supply goes back to normal and price goes down. As a matter of fact, let's say supply was in a normal, but you have too much supply. So this is like when you go to a store, there is too much supply of certain sizes of certain clothing brands or whatever. So you have excess supply, and what happens is because the supply is much higher than the demand, that the price goes down. And we have something called inelastic demand. Inelastic demand means that even though the price went up, say 40%, the demand went down by a much smaller percentage. Okay, so what that means is these are like price insensitive. So basically, this is like luxury goods. You know, if they go up in price, say 40%, well, a lot of these people are not price sensitive, so the demand doesn't go down. Or you can have the other extreme, right? Where it's so necessary. So let's say the price of your train ticket goes up 40%, But you still need to take the train. You have no other option. You can't walk 20 miles or 10 miles. Okay, and the other options are not better or less expensive, so the demand goes down by very little. Then we have different type of pricing objectives. So usually those that are trying to go at a very low price are on a price maximization, right? So you're trying to gain a lot of market share. Okay, maybe you're a new product that wants to gain a lot of the market before your competitors. Or there is competitive pricing. So here we have gas stations. I think you guys remember vividly my example of how the gas station that was a block away, every time they went down in price, they forced me to go down in price or I would start losing customers. And the most I could do was maintain between 6 and 8 cents. Or you have value pricing where you can justify value price because you give more features. Or you have like prestige objectives. So this is again less price sensitive things because they're based on image. So essentially you have two major pricing strategies, cost based and value based. So cost based is you design a product. So let's say you design the best product you can design, and based on how much it costs to design that product, you set the price and then try to convince buyers to buy your product on that price. Value based is kind of the opposite. You assess how much your customers are willing to pay for certain need, then you design a product so that you can match that price. And you need to look if it's even possible with the cost. Okay. So let's look again. So you look at how much people are willing to pay. You set a target price based on that. You look at the cost and then you design the product. So first you set the price, look at the cost, and then you design that product based on that target price. So sorry because I kind of skipped a step. So those are the two basic approaches. So you have cost-based pricing where you usually use a markup. And markup, you need to uh, basically is this formula where if your target is to increase, to have a 40% markup, so you have $10 wine, 10 times 1.4, so 40% is $14. And then you have margin. Margin is based on the gross margin, how much you want to make for that product. And that one, the formula a little more complicated. So it's your cost divided by 1 minus the margin. So if your margin is 35%, then you want your sales price to be 100 divided by 1 minus 0.35, 0.65, and there is your margin. So these should not be confused. You can get very, very different outcomes if you confuse the two. If you do markup 60%, $800 for TV that costs $500. And if you do margin, $1,250. So this is $450 more. So it could be very, very different. So margins are used a lot when you're trying to figure out, based on your competition, what is the desired margin. So let's say here we have these bikes, mountain bikes, where the margin, industry margin is typically 40%, but for accessories is 60%. So now you have kind of like a benchmark, and then you'll set the price. Again, you can make modifications to whatever you want. Maybe instead of 5,200, because you want to use, you'll see in a moment, psychology pricing, you, I don't know, 51.99. Or here instead of 175, you do, 169.99 or 179.99, whatever. So we have variable and fixed costs. So fixed costs remain stable independently how much you produce or you sell. Variable costs change with the level of production. So raw materials, labor, yeah, but be careful with this. This is not salaries, right? So administrative payroll, that would be fixed. This is if you hire, say, temporary labor. There is this, I don't want to get too technical on this. Fixed costs are the things that you have to pay no matter what. If it rains and people come or don't come, you still have to pay them. So why are these so important? This is an example of fitness facility, but I want to use a different example. So what we want to figure out is, what is our break even? Break even is a method to figure out how much we need to sell to cover our fixed costs or overhead. So we have this curve, but I designed an easier visual to understand. So I explained this in class, I'll explain it again. So let's say you buy these flip-flops for $5, you buy them wholesale, and you want to make a 50% margin because that's what they told you people can charge for this. So 50% margin, your cost divided by minus the margin is $10. Your fixed cost, which is renting this thing, is $20,000 for the whole thing, including the point of sale system, and you need to pay somebody who's going to be there, so $40,000. So what happens is, if you sell 8,000 flip-flops, you should reach your break-even point. This is where you don't lose or make any money. So let's look at the math, okay? So 8,000 units, $10 a piece is $80,000. Our fixed cost is $40,000. And then our contribution margin is our sales price, which is $10 per unit, minus your variable cost, which is your cost, $5. And to convert to a percentage, you divide again by the sales price, so that's 50%. 10 minus 5 divided by 10, 50%. 40 divided by 50%, 80,000. Now let's look if I produce 4,000 units. Well, if I produce 4,000 units, right, then what's going to happen is we can just use the margin. We're going to have sales of $40,000. Our margin is 50%, so it's 20,000 minus 40. We lose $20,000. So here we're losing $20,000. Okay. So these are the losses, $20,000. But if we sell 12,000 units, meaning $120,000, then 50%, which is our margin of 120.60 minus 40.20, so we make $20,000. So one of the things we want to look carefully is this whole cost, volume, profit relationship. So what does that mean? That means whenever we're doing analysis of changes to our business, we want to look at the gross margin. So let's look at an example. So we did the cheesecake example. So in this particular case, we're currently selling 800 cheesecakes at $10 a piece. So total revenue, we sell them at $10 each. So 800 times 10, 8,000. Now it costs us $6 to make them. So 800 times 6, $4,800. So when you do the math, 8,000 minus 4,800, we're making 3,200. Now let's decide you want to cut the price, and now you're selling 1,000 cheesecakes. So in terms of revenue, you're doing the same because your price went down, but you're selling more. So still 8,000. But your cost went up because now you have to make 1,000 of these. Times $6, 6,000. So your gross margin goes down to 2,000. Now let's say you want to increase to $12, then your volume goes down significantly to 600. 600 times 12, 7,200. So if you were to stop here, you would say this is the worst option. But it actually isn't, because business is to make money, to make profits. Who cares how much you sell? What people care about is how much you make, because that's the money that ends up in the bank. So 7,200 now, because you're making only 600 of these, times 6 is 3,600, and your gross profit is 3,600, right? Now, because we did not have to incur any additional fixed costs, we only care about the margin. So that would be the best choice. The best choice would be to increase to $12. So here we have some additional formulas. And I don't think you need to memorize these because this is very much just algebra. You know, once you do a break even, then if you have the margin but you don't have the fixed cost, then you can just do that. If you have a profit goal, then you can add it to the margin. But I really suggest that basically it's just algebra. All right, and I gave you a very detailed example here where actually variable cost went up because you have to pay a commission to grow up, and fixed costs also went up because you needed more staff. But you're still better off using Grubhub because your total profit went up. You're still not at the same as Domino's, but at the end of the day, you're not trying to be Domino's, you're trying to improve your business. If you want to be Domino's, then sell your business and buy a Domino's franchise. Okay, so we have all these pricing strategies. Premium pricing, basically, this is when you are like a luxury good and you charge higher price. Economy would be the opposite. So you are like the lowest price. Or psychology. Psychology is 1999, 1995, and so on. Penetration pricing. So penetration is you go in at a low price, try to get as much of the market as possible. So your competitors, when they try to get in, you already have that protected. Okay, so you can have like a free trial period or an introductory lower price, something like a freemium, or you can do price skipping. This is the opposite. If somebody wants to buy your product when it first comes out, like it happens often with consumer electronics, you come in at a higher price. Then you have promotional pricing. So you have bundle pricing, like buy one, get one free, or VIP. These are volume incentive programs. The more you buy, then the lower the price. These are usually your push promotions. But not all retailers work the same way. Walmart works value pricing. This is everyday low price. Now, temporary price reduction, these are the promotional pricing that happens typically on a weekly basis. They're called temporary price reductions. They're also called features. What happens, this has an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is you sell more when it's on feature, when it's on sale. The disadvantage is the following week, the sales go way down. So you have this phenomenon where sales are going up when you have an offer and down when you take out the offer. And this is called high-low. So the reason why Walmart goes to everyday low price is because this high-low strategy causes a lot of inefficiencies in the supply chain. Inefficiencies that retailers are willing to do because this is still working for them. A while back, most retailers tried to do EDLP and they came back. Probably didn't work. Cost-based strategy, we talked about that. So here we would do some sort of markup. So again, you have here more explanation of these strategies, discount allowance to reward customers so they buy more. You can do segmented strategy, okay, for different type. But here, be careful. You can have different prices to different customers because you could get in trouble. But let's say you have different products for different segments. So you have the high end, let's say, so like with automobiles, you have like the platinum, right? So if you buy, I guess, a Corolla Platinum, it's a lot more expensive than the standard. Psychological pricing, we talked about that already. Temporary price reduction. So I think we talked about. Oh, the one we didn't talk about is dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is prices adjust continuously. So this is Uber, right? Uber, the prices constantly adjust based on supply and demand. Now we see this with like Ticketmaster. International pricing, well, do you have different costs internationally, different currencies, so you may have different pricing. So again, there's certain things to be careful with. You cannot do price fixing, okay, or predatory pricing, which is to go below cost. So there is some of these things called the Robinson-Packing Act, which does not allow for price discrimination, and and then you also the pricing across different channels. So there is all these rules, deceptive pricing, where you try to mislead consumers. So there is all these laws. All right, so that takes care about pricing. International. So for international, I'm really gonna cover, let's see, 40 minutes. Yeah, we can do this in 10 minutes. So we have all of these different models: exports, franchising, licensing, contract manufacturing. And notice what changes is the control and the risk. If you're just doing export, that means you're selling online, say, to other countries. Well, once it leaves your, store, you have little or no control and no risk. All the risk is bear by the buyer. Okay. Franchise agreement and licensing agreements a little different. You have more control, so McDonald's tells their franchises what is it that they can do and not do, and but the risk is higher because now you have more at stake. Joint ventures, it goes even more, right? Because you have like half ownerships. So the risk, the more commitment, the higher the risk, but also the higher the control. Now, if you have a wholly owned subsidiary, meaning you open the business there, then you have full control, but you bear all the risk. You don't share it with others. So we have these 10 commandments of branding. So these are important. So one is understanding the global landscape. So that means understanding their behavior, legal restrictions. So everything is going on in the landscape. Avoid shortcuts in brand building. So you can't take any shortcuts. People, if they don't know your brand, like it happened with Walmart in China, you have to go through the process. You have to create awareness, your image, and so on. Establish a marketing infrastructure. So if you arrive to a new country, you need to have some sort of infrastructure so that to commercialize your product. And you either have to do it from scratch or you basically join with others. Embrace integrated marketing communication. So there's many types of communications, not just advertising, but it's better if everything has some sort of integration. Establish brand partnerships. So this is what we're talking about in terms of joint ventures. Balance standardization and customization. So things like packaging, brand name, are things that can be standardized. Even advertising, depending on the product or brand. So like I showed you in the Pantene example. But then the distribution and the communication, but the local communication, that needs customization. So local communication means how you communicate your brand at the store retail level. Again, this also depends on the strategy, right? So if you have a global strategy where your brand is recognized everywhere, then that can be standardized. If you have a completely different brand, then that needs to be customized. So you need to balance this thing, and that would be number 7. Balance global and local controls. So typically, local managers will make some decisions, and some are done on a global basis. Establish guidelines. So even if you have franchises in other countries like McDonald's, in terms of certain things that they got to do, and then certain things they cannot do. So I mean, they cannot, for example, use completely different branding symbols and so on for McDonald's. It's the same arches all over the world. Or you can be as strict as we didn't talk about Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza is pretty strict. They allow like 1 or 2 variations, but for the most part, pizza is a pizza. Implement a brand equity measurement system, so something that you can measure how the image of the brand is, and then leverage brand elements. So these are things like trademarks. Every country in the world requires a trademark. Okay, so we did the Pantene example. We listened to AJ Lafley. AJ Lafley talks about playing to win in the international marketplace, and he talks about kind of the aspiration is improve lives and deliver leadership. And then the strategy of where we play, has to do with focusing on leading brands, beauty and healthcare as opposed to food, emerging markets, how we win. So this is differentiated strategy, core competencies like globalization, understanding the customer, and then kind of your goal, strategy, and metrics on how you measure. So this is kind of the extended interview of A.G. Lafley. Okay. So we talked already about indirect and direct exporting, the different types of joint ventures, standardized versus adapted. So tariffs, I think we all know what these tariffs are now. Basically, these are like taxes. So if something comes from outside, let's talk about the United States, and it has, let's say, it's somebody you buy from Brazil, beef, and it has a 20% tariff, then whoever is buying that beef, let's say it's Walmart, has to pay that 20% tariff. Okay. Now, what's happening in reality is sometimes the producer says, well, you know what? So that you don't have to pay a 20% tariff, I'm going to absorb half of that and I'll charge you 10% less. So there is all sorts of things that are being or happening. Or maybe Walmart says, you know what? I'll make less money so that instead of being a 20% price increase, only 5. So there's different ways. And then we have exchange controls. So this is how much the currency is worth. And if your currency, let's say the dollar is very strong, right? And you get more euros, then you'll be able to buy more when you go to Europe. The problem is the Europeans will buy less American goods because it's more expensive. They have to pay more euros for $1. And then the opposite happens. So there is all these trade agreements, which unfortunately many of them are ignored. We have trade zones where there is no tariff, like the European Union. We used to have NAFTA, now something different. But at the end of the day, you need to adapt to the economic and local structure. So we saw this clearly with Walmart. And you have all sorts of regulations. So in the case of China, for example, there is the joint venture of 5149, where 51% needs to be owned by a Chinese company. So here are some things to look at when you're going into a new market. You want to look at demographics, meaning size, population, geographics, economic factors, social, political. So I'm not going to go through everything. You have a list. I'm not going to go through each one in the list. And the Walmart case study is really good on how all of these apply. So how do you decide what you're going to do? Well, you have many choices. I'm going to go over the different choices. Different choices are, so from a communication standpoint, product standpoint. So you don't change the product, don't change the communication, so that's a straight extension. Now, you don't change the communication, but you make small adjustments to the product. So like I said, sometimes the flavor of a product is a little different, so you make a small change, but everything else remains the same. Or the product remains the same, but you do different advertising. So this is Pantene, right? So the product was the same, but you make some changes. You're going to different countries, so you make some changes. You have, you're going to Latin America, so you're doing it in Spanish. And you use some local talent or local casting. Or you change both. So this would be, let's say in the case of Pantene, we would have changed the fragrance. Okay, so that would be changes in product, changing in advertising. Or you have a completely new product. Okay, you have a completely new product that doesn't even exist. So in the case of P&G, this was a new invention, Rindex. Rindex was basically a new product, very low cost, to meet the needs of emerging countries that couldn't afford Ariel, which is the equivalent of Tide. So again, deciding has to do with many different factors. So ethics is what I'm going to discuss the last day of class. But here, this pyramid for me is really, really important. This is called the pyramid of corporate responsibility. So first, you have at the bottom, and sometimes it's on the top, is you want to be profitable. but then you also have to obey the law. And then this is the part ethical. You have an obligation to do what's right, just, fair, avoid harm. Doesn't always happen, but if you want to go through this pyramid of social responsibility, that's what you do. And then there is philanthropic, where you actually contribute to the community. You're not just ethical. And most well-run companies do all of these. And there is a lot of evidence that those that do went rewarded. If you do all of these, then customers are willing to pay more because they do see the effects of all these things. Okay, so I'm not going to go through these because this is what I'm going to go through in class. There is some criticisms of deceptive marketing, but I'm going to go through this the last day of class. So in another screen, which I cannot show you, I have the exam. So let me make sure that I've covered everything. So let me pause this for a second. So one of the things with marketing intermediaries, they sometimes are separate business, each one making their own profit. So let me give you an example. If my gas station, I'm trying to make a profit, but I can't go to Costco and say, look, in order to make a profit, I need you to lower your price. They're saying, no, we're trying to maximize profit too. So every business is trying to maximize profit. And then Costco is going to say, look, I'm buying from P&G and they're trying to maximize profit too. Okay, so everybody's trying to maximize their own profits. So, well, we talked about multi-channel and omni-channel. So multi-channel being when you use online, brick and mortar, and many other things. So let's see. I think we did a pretty good job of covering everything. Remember the different calculations. Yes, we covered everything. So if you pay close attention to this video, you should ace this exam. All right, everybody. Thank you.